Before we begin, this story contains themes of emotional manipulation and controlling behavior in relationships. If these topics are difficult for you, please take care of yourself. He wanted out, signed the papers, hired the lawyers, but the moment she smiled at another man, everything changed. What started as a cold business arrangement turned into an obsession that would trap them both. This is the story of a divorce that never happened. If you've ever wondered how control can masquerade as love, and how breaking free sometimes means risking everything, stay with me until the end. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Stories about reclaiming your power don't come around often enough. Let me tell you about Cameron and Nicole, and why their story matters more than you might think. Cameron was a 42-year-old real estate billionaire. Hotels, luxury developments, commercial properties spanning 3 continents. The kind of man who walked into rooms and expected them to rearrange themselves around him. And usually they did. He'd built his empire through calculated decisions, strategic partnerships, and an almost supernatural ability to see potential where others saw risk. He was brilliant at reading markets, at understanding what people wanted before they knew it themselves. But understanding what people felt? That was a completely different language, one Cameron had never bothered to learn. Nicole was 35, a gifted architect who'd clawed her way up in an industry that had 1,000 subtle ways of telling Black women they didn't belong. She'd heard them all: the clients who'd walk past her to shake hands with her white junior associate, assuming he was the lead; the contractors who'd question every decision she made on site, then accept the same direction from a male colleague without hesitation; the design meetings where her innovative ideas would be met with silence, only to be praised 20 minutes later when a white man rephrased them. She'd learned to document everything, to bring twice the preparation to every meeting, to speak with absolute certainty even when she had doubts. She developed a professional armor so thick that sometimes she forgot what her real personality felt like underneath it. Her mother had taught her early, you have to be twice as good to get half the credit. Her grandmother had taught her earlier, sometimes you have to smile through disrespect to get where you're going. Nicole had been smiling through disrespect for a very long time. Their marriage 8 years ago was what people in certain circles call strategic. Cameron's family had old money stretching back generations, the kind of wealth that opened doors before you even knocked. Nicole's family had worked 3 generations to build their success, her grandfather starting with a small construction business that her father had grown into a respected development company. When Cameron's father and Nicole's father found themselves on the same charity board, they saw an opportunity that benefited both families. Cameron needed the stability of marriage to satisfy his board of directors, who worried about his playboy reputation. Nicole's father saw a chance to secure his daughter's access to projects and circles that rarely welcomed Black professionals, no matter how qualified. The marriage would merge 2 powerful networks, create opportunities for both families, and look good in the society pages. Nobody talked about love. That wasn't part of the contract. Their wedding was featured in 3 magazines. The photos were stunning. Nicole in a custom gown, Cameron in a perfectly tailored tux, both of them smiling for cameras, while their families networked in the background. It looked like a fairy tale. It felt like a business merger, because that's exactly what it was. Here's what nobody tells you about those kinds of marriages: they can look perfect from the outside while being absolutely hollow on the inside. And that's exactly what theirs was. Cameron and Nicole lived in a 12,000 square foot mansion with separate bedrooms on opposite wings. They had separate schedules, separate social circles, separate lives that occasionally intersected for public appearances. They'd attend charity galas together, Cameron's hand on the small of Nicole's back, both of them playing their parts perfectly. They'd smile for photos at industry events, make small talk with important people, then drive home in silence and retreat to their separate spaces. It was professional, polite, perfectly empty. Nicole had learned to make herself smaller in that house, quieter, less vibrant. She'd stopped wearing her hair natural because Cameron once mentioned he preferred it straightened for events. She'd stopped playing music in the common areas because he needed quiet to think. She'd stopped inviting friends over because the house was his space, really, and she was just living in it. It's what happens when you're constantly performing for someone else's comfort. You forget what your authentic self even looks like. For 8 years, this arrangement worked. Cameron's board was satisfied. Nicole got access to high-profile projects through Cameron's connections. Their families were pleased with the alliance. On paper, it was successful, but paper doesn't capture the slow death of living like a ghost in your own life. After 8 years, Cameron decided he was done. The marriage had served its purpose. He'd proven himself as a stable family man. His empire was more secure than ever. His reputation was solid. He didn't need this arrangement anymore. He started thinking about what else he might want from life, and this empty marriage wasn't part of that vision. He called his lawyer on a Monday morning and had divorce papers drawn up by Wednesday afternoon. He planned it like he planned everything, efficiently, with generous terms that would make the separation smooth. He'd offer Nicole a settlement that would set her up independently. They'd part ways amicably, and they'd both move on. Simple, clean, businesslike. He presented the papers over breakfast on a Thursday morning. Nicole was reading something on her tablet, drinking coffee. Cameron slid the leather folder across the marble table. "I think it's time we make this official," he said simply. Nicole looked up, her expression unreadable. She opened the folder, scanned the first few pages, then looked back at him. "All right," she said. That was it. Just one word. No tears, no anger, no surprise. Just calm acceptance. And that's when Cameron felt something he didn't expect. A flicker of irritation that he couldn't quite name. He'd expected, what exactly? He didn't know. Some kind of reaction? Maybe he'd thought she'd be upset, or relieved, or something other than this neutral acceptance. Her calmness bothered him, in a way he couldn't articulate. "That's it? Just all right?" he found himself saying. Nicole gave him a small, tired smile. "What did you expect, Cameron? We both know what this marriage has been. You're right, it's time." They agreed to a quiet 6-month separation, while lawyers handled the details. They'd maintain public appearances when absolutely necessary, but otherwise begin transitioning to separate lives. Nicole would move into the guest house on their property, a beautiful 3-bedroom cottage near the garden that had been used for visiting family. Nicole packed her things over the weekend, her clothes, her books, her design equipment, the few personal items that had made that big, empty house feel slightly like home. She took a painting her mother had given her, a quilt her grandmother had made, photos of her family. It struck her, as she packed, that she'd accumulated so little personal presence in 8 years. She'd been living like a guest in Cameron's space all along. When she closed the door of the guest house behind her that Sunday night, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she could breathe. And for the first time in 8 years, Nicole started living instead of performing. She woke up when her body wanted to wake up, not when she needed to avoid Cameron. She made breakfast while playing music loudly. She worked on design projects she'd been dreaming about for years. Sustainable community housing, cultural centers that honored Black architecture, spaces that prioritized people over profit. The projects that had lived in her sketchbooks because they weren't prestigious enough for Cameron's circle. She reconnected with her college friends, the ones she'd gradually drifted away from during her marriage. She joined an architecture collective where Black and brown designers gathered to share ideas, critique each other's work, and support each other in an industry that often felt hostile. She started wearing her hair natural, in the beautiful locks she'd been growing secretly for 2 years. She laughed more, moved differently. It was like watching someone step out of a shadow into sunlight, shedding a costume they'd been wearing for so long they'd almost forgotten it wasn't their real skin. Cameron noticed. How could he not? He'd see her walking through the garden in the mornings, coffee in hand, face tilted toward the sun. He'd hear music drifting from the guest house at night. Once, he saw her having friends over, their laughter carrying across the lawn. He'd never heard her laugh like that, open, unguarded, real. It unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. He told himself it was nothing. They were getting divorced. Of course she was moving on. That was the plan. That was what he wanted. But something about her transformation gnawed at him. Then Nicole met Daniel. It happened at a charity auction, where Nicole had designed the venue space, a beautiful integration of art and architecture that had people talking. Daniel owned a gallery downtown, one that specifically championed emerging Black artists who couldn't get shows at mainstream galleries. He was 38, well-traveled, thoughtful. He'd stopped at Nicole's design display, and they'd started talking about the relationship between art and space, about creating beauty that was accessible rather than exclusive. They understood each other immediately. Both of them had spent years navigating predominantly white, professional spaces, developing that sixth sense for microaggressions, that exhaustion that comes from constantly proving your worth. With each other, they could just exist. They started meeting for coffee to discuss projects, then dinner to continue conversations that never seemed to finish. Daniel was genuinely interested in Nicole's ideas, asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from previous conversations. He saw her work not as an extension of Cameron's world, but as brilliant in its own right. For the first time in years, Nicole felt truly seen. Cameron heard about Daniel from his assistant, who'd mentioned seeing Nicole at a gallery opening. He told himself it didn't matter. Nicole was allowed to have friends. They were getting divorced. But then he saw them together. Cameron had a business dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. He was in the middle of discussing a development deal when he glanced across the room, and there they were, Nicole and Daniel at a corner table. Nicole wore a deep burgundy dress he'd never seen, her locks styled beautifully, silver jewelry catching the light. She was leaning forward, completely engaged in whatever Daniel was saying. And then she laughed, really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from your entire body, uninhibited and joyful. Daniel was looking at her like she was the only person in the world, like she was precious, like she mattered. Cameron felt something crack inside his chest, something primal and ugly and possessive. He couldn't focus on his business associates, couldn't hear what they were saying. All he could do was watch Nicole across the room, glowing with a happiness he'd never seen in her, and feel this burning, twisting sensation that he finally recognized as jealousy. He started asking questions. Who was Daniel? How did they meet? How often did they see each other? He had his assistant do research, where Daniel's gallery was located, what kind of art he showed, his professional background. His assistant assumed it was a security concern. But Cameron knew better. He was becoming obsessed, and some distant part of him recognized how wrong that was. He started finding excuses to be near Nicole. He'd drive past the gallery. He'd show up at events he knew she'd attend. He couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on work. His business partners started noticing his distraction. "Cameron, you all right? You seem off lately," one of them said, after he'd missed an important question in a board meeting. He wasn't all right. He was unraveling, and he knew it. But he couldn't stop himself. One night, he couldn't take it anymore. It was 11 p.m., and he was sitting in his study, unable to focus on anything except the image of Nicole laughing with Daniel. He walked across the dark lawn to the guest house and knocked on the door. Pounded on it, really. Nicole opened the door in pajamas, confused and alarmed. "Cameron, what's wrong? Who is he?" Cameron demanded. His voice came out harsher than he intended. "This Daniel. How long has this been going on?" Nicole stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What are you talking about? I saw you at the restaurant with him." Understanding dawned on Nicole's face, followed quickly by anger. "Are you serious right now?" Cameron, we're getting divorced. Remember, this entire thing was your idea. We're still married, Cameron shot back. It looks inappropriate. Nicole's voice rose. Inappropriate. You filed for divorce. You wanted out. I moved out of your house. We're separated. I can see whoever I want. I just think we should be more discreet for the next 6 months. For appearances. No. Nicole's voice was firm, in a way he'd never heard before. You don't get to do this. You don't get to control my life anymore, Cameron. We had an agreement, and I've kept every part of it. Now leave. I mean it. Leave. She closed the door in his face, locked it. Cameron stood there in the dark, his heart pounding, and realized he was in serious trouble, because what he was feeling wasn't love. It was possession. It was ego. It was the terrible realization that he'd never valued Nicole until someone else showed him her worth. The next morning, Cameron did something he knew was wrong. He called his lawyer and quietly stopped the divorce proceedings. Didn't tell Nicole, just put everything on hold. Then he started inserting himself into her life more deliberately. And I need you to understand something clearly. What Cameron was doing wasn't romantic. It wasn't love. These were control tactics, monitoring someone's movements, manufacturing, beneath the performance. And she wasn't going back into that cage, no matter what it cost her. She hired a different lawyer, one who specialized in complicated, high-conflict divorces, one who understood power imbalances and wasn't intimidated by Cameron's wealth or connections. She started documenting everything, every unwanted visit, every manufactured coincidence, every threatening communication from his legal team. And then Nicole did something that required more courage than anything else she'd ever done. She gave an interview to a major business magazine. The piece was framed as a discussion about women in architecture, but Nicole talked honestly about her experience in a controlling marriage. She discussed losing herself in an arrangement that benefited everyone except her. She spoke about how women, particularly Black women, are often expected to be grateful for positions that slowly suffocate them. How she'd been the perfect wife in public and invisible in private. How leaving had meant risking everything she'd worked for. She never named Cameron directly. She didn't have to. The article went viral within hours. People in their social circles connected the dots immediately. Other women started sharing their own stories of strategic marriages and controlling partners. The narrative Cameron had carefully constructed of a stable, successful marriage ending amicably crumbled overnight. His business partners started distancing themselves. His board called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation and the damage to the company's reputation. Deals he'd been working on suddenly hit complications. Everything Cameron had tried to protect by controlling Nicole was falling apart anyway. He sat alone in his enormous house one night, scrolling through responses to Nicole's interview, and finally understood what he'd become. Not a man in love, not even a man who'd made mistakes. He'd become someone who tried to own another human being, who valued Nicole only when losing her threatened his sense of control. He'd spent 8 years married to an extraordinary woman and never bothered to actually know her. And when she'd finally started living authentically, his first instinct hadn't been to celebrate her freedom. It had been to trap her again. The next morning, Cameron called his lawyer. He signed every paper, agreed to every term. He sent the documents to Nicole's lawyer with a simple note. I'm sorry, you deserved better. You always did. When Nicole received the news, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted, relieved, and finally free. Not just from Cameron, but from the version of herself that had spent years making herself smaller, quieter, more palatable. She never spoke to Cameron again. There was nothing left to say. Nicole rebuilt her architectural firm on her own terms. She took projects that excited her rather than ones that impressed others. She designed affordable housing that incorporated sustainable practices and celebrated cultural aesthetics. She mentored young Black women entering the field, helping them navigate the same obstacles she'd faced. She created work that made people stop and think, structures that proved a Black woman's vision could reshape not just skylines, but how we think about community and space. As for Daniel, that's more complicated. Time heals some wounds, but trust, once broken, requires patience and proof to rebuild. Maybe they found their way back to each other. Maybe Nicole needed time to heal on her own first. Maybe she met someone entirely different who'd never known the trapped version of her. That's her story to tell, not mine. Cameron learned the hardest lesson of his life, but he learned it too late. You can't control love. You can't possess another person's happiness. You can't own someone's spirit, no matter how much power you think you have. And when you try, you lose everything that actually matters. He'd spent his entire life building an empire of steel and glass, constructing monuments to his own success. But he'd never learned how to build something real with another person. He'd never learned that the most valuable things can't be acquired or controlled. They can only be earned through respect, genuine care, and seeing another person as fully human. By the time he figured that out, the woman who could have taught him those lessons was long gone, and honestly, she was better off without him. This story isn't really about divorce. It's about the moment someone stops performing for others and starts living for themselves. It's about how control disguises itself as concern, how obsession masquerades as love, and how breaking free requires more courage than staying ever will. Cameron had 8 years to see Nicole, really see her, to value her brilliance, appreciate her strength, understand the woman he'd married. But he only wanted her when losing her bruised his ego. He only fought for her when another man recognized her worth. That's not love. That's ownership. That's ego. And the universe has a perfect way of teaching people who try to own others that you can't possess what you never truly valued. Nicole's story is one of reclamation, of remembering who you are beneath the roles you've played, of choosing yourself even when it means losing everything you thought you needed. That's real courage. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me, do you think people like Cameron can truly change? Or is walking away always the answer? Have you ever had to choose between security and freedom? I genuinely want to know your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories about karma, resilience, and what happens when people finally choose themselves over comfort. Stories about real human complexity, about the price of freedom, and about the courage it takes to walk away from what's slowly destroying you. I'll see you in the next one.